So this is a podcast that the Positive Impact intern team are leading. They're asking me, I'm Fiona Pelham, CEO of Positive Impact, all sorts of questions in relation to
the UN Climate Summit
that just took place in New York last week. So who would like to ask the first question?
I can. So we were just talking about how to start it off, and we were wondering why the summit was important, both in general and for Positive Impact events.
That's a great starting question. So the United Nations General Assembly happens regularly. This year there was much more focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's a few factors that have made that happen that I'll talk about from outside the UN. So one of the factors is business changing. The Business Roundtable in US shared that it's no longer just about shareholder value through money, it's now about stakeholder values and looking after stakeholders. There's been a growing interest with European companies doing the same thing. A few years ago, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, announced that, through a letter to all of the companies that BlackRock invest in, that they expect to see returns that's not just financial returns. So the business world is changing. But then the really big shift has come from Greta and her protests and young people around the world protesting. And I think never underestimate the power of young people and children saying, I don't like this, and what that will mean to their parents who are people at work. So that has led up to this year's Sustainable Development Goals Summit being very important. It's 10 years until the Sustainable Development Goals need to be reached. And the UN said, we're not on track. We want acceleration actions from different people. And that's where it became important for Positive Impact, because for over 15 years, we've provided education within the event industry to inspire the industry to be sustainable. And then in the last 6 months, it's become more of a disruption, more of a, okay, we'll be the critical friend of the event industry. We are independent. We find our funding from people that believe in what we do, and then we spend it in a way that will make a difference. So this was an opportunity for Positive Impact to create an acceleration action on how events could be used to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Our second question is, how much was the events industry spoken about in relation to the SDGs whilst at the summit?
So the summit takes place across the whole of New York, across a whole week. It kicked off on Monday, climate change. Tuesday, Wednesday moved into the SDG conference. There was UN Women initiatives happening at the same time. So there is so much activity, which obviously I wasn't at all of it. But what I tried to do was dip in and out of different types of events that wouldn't be typical for me to attend. And I was doing that to see if there was a conversation around the events industry. So I'm very biased because I work in the event industry, and I see that to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, people need to come together to collaborate. And that is the event industry. So the events that I went to, no one was really talking about events. I went to one which was a review on reporting. And in the work that we've done for the Acceleration Action, we've audited 200 companies' reports, and none of them mention events within their reports. And I spoke to one of the speakers from a very big blue chip global company after the event and said, we did this piece of work, and even today no one's mentioned events. What do you think? And he said, well, it's really interesting that you've come to talk to me now, because I went to my meetings and events department last month and I said to them, let's talk about sustainability and let's talk about what your impacts might be. And they said, this isn't relevant for us. Our impacts are very small. We just do the meetings. And he said, I was really surprised at how unengaged they were. And I think one of my big takeaways from being there last week was that the event industry is missing a huge opportunity to have a narrative which is, we are the people that bring people together to find the solutions for the goals. We are the people that provide education. We should all have more and more face-to-face events. That's how peace is created in the world. And that narrative is missing. And I don't know who is going to bring that narrative unless it's the event industry supply chain. And obviously, you don't need to go question to question. If you think of any anything else you want to say from what I've said. So anything you want to respond to, or...
Do you think that if he hadn't just had that meeting with his events team, he would have had the same response? Because do you think his natural assumption would be that they would have thought about it?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, because over all the 15 years, I've never met a corporate that's just spoken to their events team before. Yeah. And what he said is what I would have suspected. But normally when I speak to the corporates, they go, oh, yeah, events. Oh, or some of them will say, we don't do events. Because they don't do events, like they're not a business that provides events, but they have a whole internal department that gathers people together. So I think if he hadn't just met with his department, he might have had a light bulb moment where he thought, oh, that's a department I've never met with. And what I really took away from that conversation is the thing that's been on the horizon for a long time is now happening. And what's been on the horizon for a long time is sustainability professionals, directors of sustainability, looking across a big global business and looking at what the impacts are across the business. And it was only a matter of time before meetings and events were going to become into that conversation. Now, if the event professionals in that department were able to say, oh, we have so many amazing impacts when you bring people together. We give 10 minutes training before our meeting about anti-trafficking so that everyone knows how to spot human trafficking. We donate all of our food. We make sure we choose venues that have renewable energy. If they were able to say all of that to their sustainability director, they would become a good story and they would start getting featured in the annual report, rather than if they said, this has nothing to do with us. They then become a target almost, because there are impacts from events. There is food waste, there is carbon emissions. So,
our third question was, would you have classed the UN Climate Summit as a sustainable event, and what SDGs were enacted, and could there have been improvements?
I think an event like that literally takes place across the whole of New York. So you've got the heads of state in one room that most people can't get to because of all the security. You've got the high-level business leaders having an evening reception in another very nice venue, again, which is very high security. Then you've got elements of people protesting. Then you've got school events, business events. So it's such a collection of events throughout the whole of New York. Now, in terms of being a sustainable event, if we go back to the definition of sustainability, is it something that will affect the generations in the future? Yes, there was definitely activities that happened. I'm thinking mainly of the use of plastic in terms of food materials, like food packaging. Yes, I definitely saw things like that. But I think what it did do was give a lot of opportunity for connection and collaboration. And there was a lot of stories about how to live in a sustainable way, which could be used within events. So I went to a wonderful session by a panel of all women, Native American, Indigenous American tribes leaders. And they brought in examples of how art makes a difference in the lives they live. They brought they were very respectful to each other in how they spoke on the panel. And that to me was an example of a sustainable event, because there was so much that we could learn from that could be repeated. And I think the event industry can get very focused on what were our environmental impacts, how much was our waste. Whereas we need to be thinking more broadly, did this event achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in its broadest sense? Any follow-on questions from that?
So let's talk about collaboration then. How key would you say collaboration between different companies is to create this sustainable events industry that we're aiming to do so?
Yeah, collaboration is utterly essential, and it's across the event industry supply chain, but it's also with the people who are going to events. And that's something that I think about a lot. I mean, we've all just had a big conversation about that. Who are the groups that we should be talking to? Is it just the event industry supply chain? Is it the big corporate companies because they have events? Is it the individual people living their lives like us who go to events? Like, who do we need to empower so that they can be championing a sustainable event, demanding a sustainable event, taking action themselves so the event is sustainable. And what I saw in New York was a real difference of bringing all these different groups of people together. It was fantastic because for the first time in a long time for me, no one had to be told these are the right things to do. No one had to talk about the business case for the Sustainable Development Goals. It was all very obvious to everybody.
Where do you think that, you say it's obvious, where do you think that obvious has come from?
Yeah, so I think it's come from all sorts of not-for-profits, small NGOs, individual champions, UN infrastructure, global business leaders, them all realising that living to your values is more important than making money. Yeah. And also that those two things are not separate. So living to your values can also make you a lot of money. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that there's a growing understanding that there's more to life than an old-fashioned approach, which was you get a job, you work hard, you make money. Now it's, okay, what is my impact in the world? What does it mean if I eat meat? Where has that meat come from? What's the difference I make with people every day? And definitely the younger generation are championing that. I mean, we hear all the time how millennials want to work for a company that has values, but also other things like millennials don't necessarily want to be at the same desk 9 to 5 every day, which I really empathise with. I was speaking to a friend in New York, and we were both saying, because we run our own businesses, that thought of being at one desk 9 to 5, that's like slave labour. But we don't think about that now. It's like factory work. It's like how people in Manchester used to work years and years and years ago. But now it looks different than a factory. So did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
My last thing is, would you say that the summit demonstrated that attitudinal change, as in the idea that life doesn't have to be what it's been before?
Yeah, so the big takeaway that I took from the summit was it's all about action now. And before, it's been about commitments, it's been about change is hard, we need buy-in, we need to think about it. But now it's like, no, it's just about action. So that, to me, and this is probably just a personal interpretation, but I took that on as it doesn't have to be the way it's always been. And it really empowered me on a personal level too, to be able to say, you're just talking now, we need action. Right? Anyone that says anything around, let's do a commitment, let's do a pledge, let's create a policy, that's all very nice, but when will your action start?
It's very much what Greta was saying, wasn't it? She was very much going along that line.
Yeah. And I think that Greta's freedom, because she is obviously not working for a company, she's a young person, she has the voice of young people on her side. So I think her freedom to say things as clearly as that is fantastic for people who work in the sustainability world, who for a long time have been saying, look, change is going to make us all more money, make us all happier. For the event industry, create more events because more people will be coming together. But it's also been seen as a threat because any change is seen as a threat. Strange human being behaviour we have.
You have started answering our fourth question, which is, what were your 3 biggest takeaways from the summit?
Well, definitely that one about action, and it's going to give me the excuse to say to anyone, that's just talk, when does the action happen? The second one I've already mentioned as well was the fact that the corporates are now looking at their events, and who knows how that will go. Maybe they'll look at their events and say, wow, there's a lot of money we spend on travel and that's a big carbon footprint. We can't do that anymore. Or maybe they'll look at their events and say, wow, this is how we could have a really good impact in the world across all of the Sustainable Development Goals, and let's report about our events in our annual report. And then my final takeaway, again, probably on a more personal note, is that it's okay to be disruptive. The last 6 to 8 months with Positive Impact, we have disrupted. We've not we've not stayed within our lines. We've not done what other people have expected us to do. We've overstepped boundaries, and there's a reward for that. And the reward is that people, when they see change is happening, they have someone to turn to be able to say, we want to get involved now. And that has happened in a big way since the summit. So my other takeaway is that we need to keep disrupting as a company. Yeah.
That's good. Our next question, I suppose, was, as an event professional championing sustainable event industries, how did you feel when you left the summit? Were you optimistic? Did you feel positive that changes were going to happen afterwards?
My personal default mode is positive, which it enables me to do the job that I do. And then having a week surrounded by all sorts of people doing all sorts of different things, I can't but fill you with optimism. There's so many amazing ideas and conversations. And I left the summit very aware that now is an utter crunch point for the event industry. We either get involved in this conversation or not. And I think the industry will then say, well, who should get involved in this conversation? And it's now every single business, every business within the supply chain. What are the commitments to action they're making? So we're no longer looking for a leader to say, the event industry will strive towards doing this. We're now saying, okay, if you're in the supply chain, you might be a hotel, you might be an event organisation company, you might be a transport provider, a caterer. What are you committing to, and how are you measuring that and reporting on that?
Just not really a question, but more sort of a bit of a point. It's interesting that you say you're always positive, because I know one of the sort of criticisms leveled at people like Greta at the moment is that it's sort of doomsday and very negative, and so I think it is quite important to sort of stay positive in sort of times like this.
Yeah, and just like Greta, I mean, someone that is a real mentor to me said to me, Fiona, just stop with these doomsday scenarios. Stop telling people that we won't be able to travel so much, that there might be a big carbon tax, that there'll be sea rising in certain areas. Just don't talk about that bit. And, from a human to human perspective, it is hard to think that what we're doing is destroying our planet. And maybe, if people are at the end of their careers, it's too much for them to understand, wow, I've been responsible for this. And maybe it's too hard for people to think, what can they do? Especially if you think of someone in a kind of a high up level of a big company or a big network of companies, it's hard for them to change. I spoke to somebody yesterday from a big company, and he said, I really want to do something, and we're having our annual budget reviews and a restructure, so if my boss says I can't, I've got 4 children to feed. And it's people are still seeing it that way. They're still seeing, I have a job that I have to keep, so I have to do what my boss says. So part of the work that I want us to do is be able to go to all those bosses so that they're encouraging the change.
I think you've partially answered this as well, but is there anything else? So has the UN Climate Action Summit given you new ideas or a direction for positive impact events?
The direction definitely to disrupt, and probably disrupt more, and then also do it in a way that is collaborative and gentle and vulnerable. That's what I'm going to take away from the session with the Indigenous tribes leaders across North America. I mean, it was amazing, the challenges they were speaking about and how they were speaking about them. So I'll take that away.
We've got one more listed. Yeah. So again, it's kind of following the same theme, but what are your next steps going forward with the acceleration action following the summit?
So in the acceleration action, we committed to 4 things. One was an annual impact report. So I'm looking at how can we collect impact from across the event industry to be able to share with event professionals and corporate companies. So in their annual reports, they can talk about the impact of events. The second action we committed to was 100,000 people using the Events My World survey and having commitments to action around that, so making sure that everyone knows about that survey. The third was to increase the promotion of resources, so that could be resources we create or other people, and the meeting that we've all just had about giving more resources to events so that they can engage with their stakeholders will help with that. And then the fourth action was to change the narrative on events so that we are seen as the way to achieve UN SDG 4, quality education, and 4.7 in particular, educating people on living in a sustainable way. So your event could start and you might have 10 minutes of education around where the food has come from and what that means, or 10 minutes education around how to spot human trafficking so that is stopped. And these are skills that people will have when they leave the event as well. So they are the next steps.
The one final question that I'd like to ask to end on a very light note is, what was your favourite part of the entire week?
My favourite part of the entire, I've mentioned it a few times, but it was the workshop with the Indigenous tribe women, and I was doing a little film after it, and one of the women just came over and stuck her head up behind me in the film, and then we just started talking, and it was a very normal, open conversation. And she leads people who are protesting in the freezing cold against drilling and all sorts of things being done in her environment and her land. And she spoke about how in their lives they are linked so closely to the land that when they see the land being destroyed, they almost feel it in their bodies. And it was being able to meet someone like that and be so easily connected with them, because you are sharing the conversation of both wanting to make a difference in the world. Because sometimes when I see those things on TV, I'm not there. I'm not in the Arctic trying to stop drilling happening. So getting the chance to be part of the community and see, she is there and I'm doing what I'm doing, and together this is what's going to create a world that works for everyone, was really powerful.
Great. That is everything from us.
Good.
Unless there's anything you want to add on the end?
No, thank you for your questions. It's good to do this. I think we should maybe do regular podcasts like this. And I hope that this is useful for you all as you go into your workplaces, because you'll be taking a different perspective that can make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.